Alrighty, so picking up where we left off on Friday, remember this chapter has dealt almost exclusively with the Hellenization of the known world, Hellenism, the spread of Greek influence, or the Greekification or Greekified areas when it comes to the ancient world. We've looked at, number one, some of the areas that were conquered by Alexander, Persia, Egypt, and everything in between. And then last class, we looked at some of the areas that were influenced by those areas conquered by Alexander. So, places like Carthage and whatnot, and where Alex never actually set foot in, but through the influence of Egypt, we see that the Carthaginians were able to absorb Greek culture. And then, of course, places like Rome, which not through other influence, well, in this case, I suppose, they conquered the Greek city-states, which in fact were conquered by not Alexander, but by his father, Philip. And so today we will be looking at, because we kind of sort of started, looking at India, all right? Now, India kind of, and of course some of the surrounding areas is a little bit of both of those, because yes, Alexander reaches India, but he doesn't actually, settle, conquer, absorb the people. After he defeats their armies, he does in fact head on back, okay? Now, in this case, we do see, though, that there is an influence from both, the fact that Alexander did go there. We talked about how a man named Chandragupta, who, while not a member of the warrior class, so he wasn't actually a part of the army, but he is able to observe what Alexander does, and after Alexander defeats the armies and leaves, there is in fact a power vacuum. And so Chandragupta not only takes over the state that he lives in, the Magadha kingdom, but then he goes out and begins to conquer many of the other kingdoms in northern India. All right. Now, we're not 100% sure, but we think that Chandragupta was probably a member of the Vaishya Varna, okay? And of course, he begins to conquer other areas, and he tries to conquer Persia, or in this case, it's now under the control of the Seleucids, one of Alex's generals. He's unable to defeat them, and so the Seleucids then try to invade India, but they're unable to do that either. And so they declare peace, okay? And this is where we left off. In order to kind of, solidify peace, number one, the Greeks agree to send Greek women, all right, as part of the peace process, and an ambassador, okay? In exchange, they receive treasure and other, things from India, and of course the treaty, okay? And so this is where we left off, all right? The ambassador that gets sent to India is a man named Megasthenes, okay? Now, remember that the name India is actually Greek, okay, which means on the other side of the Indus River, all right? Now, yes, much of what we know about ancient India comes from the Vedas, and we mentioned this, I want to say chapter 2, it might have been chapter 3, but the reason why we know what's in the Vedas is because of Megasthenes, okay? While he's in India, all right, and he actually lives there for about 12 years, Okay, while he's there, he learns the language and then is able to translate it. Okay, all of the stuff that he gets a hold of. And then, along with that, he also records everything that he sees going on while he's an ambassador and living in India. And he writes a book called Indica, okay, obviously in Greek, okay, and remember, Greek is, the language of education and learning and academics for the next 1,000+ years. And so this is how the knowledge of ancient India actually gets to us, okay, through the Greeks, okay? Now, some of the things that he notices, all right? So in addition to what he reads and translates in the Vedas, okay, here's the things that he writes down that to him are just completely like, whoa, all right? These people are really, out there. Number one, yes, there's all kinds of people, all right? They have this diverse society, but, okay, they have these social classes, all right? And it's all in this stratified order, okay? And of course, if you're in one social class, you're only allowed to associate and do things with your social class. And if you're in a higher social class, you're expected to do certain things, but you don't mix with any of the other social classes, okay? And in this case, it's not as you can say you were born in a lower class and you marry someone from an upper class because, in Greek society, you could do that. In Persian society, you could do that, You're born to a low class, you meet someone from an upper class, you marry them, and so now you've elevated your own station. He's like, no, there's no intermarriage, okay? If you are a member of a particular class, you're only allowed to marry people from that class, okay? In fact, it's not, it goes beyond just marriage. You're not even allowed to associate, okay, with people of the other classes. You can't even be friends or, have a cup of coffee or lunch or anything, okay? So, the upper class only sits with the upper class and the lower class only sits with the lower class, and that's it, okay? Now, of course, that's like the biggest observation that he makes, okay? Other things that he talks about and that eventually, become improvements in other parts of the world. He's like, yeah, they have, roads and the government, puts them there, okay? And not only that, they're not just like functional, okay? But, there's like trees and stuff and plants and, it's like your journey isn't just going from A to B. You should have something nice to look at while you're going along, okay? And of course, one of the biggest things that stood out to Megasthenes is the fact that amongst all of these classes, there was one social class that was strictly the warriors, all right? That was it, okay? They did all the fighting, and that's all they did, okay? Their entire life, he's like, they're kind of like Spartans almost. Their entire life is dedicated to just fighting, and they don't do anything else, okay? And warriors marry warriors, and, they produce another warrior class. So if you've got a farmer who's like big and ripped, and you think, yeah, let's put some armor on this person, and no, because they're a farmer, that's all they'll ever do, okay? And such like that, okay? So to them, it was, wow, it's like this completely different alien world, okay? And like I said, the reason why we know about this today, though, is because of Megasthenes, all right? The time that he spends in India, and of course, not only his translations of the Vedas, but his firsthand observations of where's my board here, of everything they do, okay? Now, when Megasthenes lives there, okay, this is what eventually becomes the Mauryan Empire, everything that you see in green. The only thing that's not united, of course, is the southern tip and what today is Sri Lanka. But during the time of Chandragupta, it's basically like this western part, what today would be Pakistan, and just the northern part. Okay, we're not going to talk too much about the Mauryan Empire, okay, because we're going to talk about its downfall, because it doesn't last very long. Okay, now we skip a generation to a ruler named Asoka, who is Chandragupta's grandson. Okay, he is now the king, and it is under Asoka, number one, that the Mauryan Empire reaches its greatest power. Okay, so it's under Asoka. All right, promise I'll come back. That all of this green comes under the control of the Mauryans. Okay, basically, they controlled all of India. Okay, now it is during the reign of Asoka that they conquered the eastern part of India, which is the area known as Kalinga. And once again, I'll come back. Okay, it's written right there, Kalinga. All right, so they conquer all of this. Now, the people in Kalinga don't surrender easily. They put up, a very spirited defense. They put up, a fight. And it's years and years of conflict, so that by the time they conquer the area, okay, the area is in ruins, pretty much, okay? And so as Asoka, tours, he goes in and, okay, this is my new land, new territory, the only thing that he finds is, death and destruction, okay? This is what it took to finally subdue the Kalingans. Okay, just all kinds of death. All right, and it's like he sees it firsthand, and he becomes ashamed, he's embarrassed of all of the destruction that he basically causes. All right, and so he feels so much guilt. Okay, that he begins to study Buddhism. To try to right his soul, and he's afraid that in the next life he's going to be kicked back, or whatever, maybe thrown to the lowest level. He adopts Buddhism, and he finds a sort of peace, a sort of tranquility in his life. Okay, he's able to find a sort of redemption for all of the death and destruction that he caused. Okay, the problem, of course, is that Buddhism, okay, tends to be a pacifist, in general, a pacifist ideal. But what he does is that he, number one, throws out, he proclaims what is known as the Kalinga Edict, saying that everybody's going to live according to the rules of Buddhism. Okay, you are going to try to find this balance and harmony in your life. Okay, you will become tolerant of other people. You will try to, bring about joy and happiness and follow the natural order of things. Okay, he's like, I should have left the Kalingans alone. All right, that was the natural thing. Okay, I went in and disrupted their lives, and now, most of them are dead. Okay. And speaking of that, he does take part of the Jainist philosophy of respect for all living creatures, and of course, he's like, yeah, we're going to take that aspect, all right, where we are going to try to avoid any unnecessary death and destruction. Okay, and we should respect all forms of life. Okay, now. This Dhamma, or in anglicized form, Dharma, okay, basically applies to everyone, all right? And if you don't, he basically forces Buddhist ideals on his empire, okay? And of course, basically saying, this is the law. If you don't like it, too bad. Okay, I'm kind of like your father, and we're all one big family, and we need to be happy. And of course, part of that happiness is listening to your parents. Okay, and so in this spirit, one of the things that he does is he bans large scale cattle sacrifice. Many of the gods, demanded a blood sacrifice, and he's basically like, no, we're going to stop that if we're really gonna comply with the idea of respect for all life forms. Then we're going to start with cows. Okay, now this is where it begins. Okay, the Indian belief that cows are in fact sacred, and you do not kill them. And it is a belief that still exists today. Cows are free to wander wherever in India. Nobody would ever be tempted to like eat them, kill them, hurt them, whatever. Okay, and from friends that I know who have traveled, it's like if there's a cow in the road, you stop and you're just there for hours. You don't push the cow, move the cow, try to coax the cow away from the road. You wait until the cow decides to go on its own. And so, this is where that starts. Okay? In order to enforce this law and in order for people to not claim ignorance, okay, Ashoka has stone pillars erected throughout the empire with all of these rules, with all of these decrees. Okay, number one. Number two, he has it written in whatever local language is the dominant one. He has it written in Sanskrit, which by now has become the governmental language, the language that people do official business in. Of course, we've been influenced by the Greeks, so he has it in Greek for any Greek foreigner, and then Aramaic for any other foreigner that may be traveling through the area. So no one can claim ignorance because it is in fact written in pretty much every language that any person of the time would speak. Okay? Now, the one on the right is an example of one of the pillars, okay, that he has constructed. They're pretty big, and then if I could get a closer picture, we'd see the inscriptions in the writing. The one on the left I'm going to talk about in a minute. It's known as a stupa, which is an early Buddhist temple, a Buddhist holy place, and I'll talk about what they did with that in a minute. Okay, but the one on the right are the old pillars and columns where Ashoka had this decree written. Now, yeah.
I was just going to say, the archaeologists really love those pillars.
Yes.
Lots of useful information.
I know, so they were just able to read it in any language, pretty much. Okay? Now, what would the one problem be with adopting Buddhism as your empire's belief system, religion, whatever? Yeah, it's pacifist. Okay? So, after Ashoka's death, the Mauryan Empire basically collapses because, other groups rebel, other groups begin to invade, and because it's pacifist, it's like, all right, well, I guess you guys can come on in and take over, type of thing. And so, it collapses. But the ideals of Buddhism spread, okay? Buddhism becomes a widespread philosophy, a widespread belief that a lot of people in India begin to follow, okay? Now, today, most Indians are Hindu, okay? Very, very few are actually Buddhist. Which is one of those like big ironies that it started in India, but almost no Indian is Buddhist. We will talk about how and why that occurred, but now Alexander's conquests did reach an area in western India known as the Punjab. Okay, and even though he didn't do it, after the Seleucids came into contact with the Mauryan Empire, they do build towns, they do build cities, and of course, they are built according to Greek style, Greek architecture. They do become these little mini Greeces for all of the Greek people that have settled in the area. Okay, and pretty soon, like I said, these Greek soldiers they brought their culture, their language, their food, all of their stuff with them, and then of course other aspects of Greek culture begin to permeate into the society. All right. Now, of course, as I mentioned, not last class, 2 classes ago, one of Alexander's, plans, strategies was to get his soldiers to marry local women so that they wouldn't want to go home, so that they could stay in the area, and then at some point he could begin, conquering more anew, now that their home is, much closer to the front. Okay. Of course, that doesn't happen because Alexander dies, but those Greek cities have been built. Those Greek areas are now in, not just the eastern part of the Persian Empire, but now in the western part of India. And of course, they do marry local women. All right, so the people that begin to populate this area are, Greco-Persian or Greco-Indian people. Okay, and of course, Greek food, Greek ideas, Greek philosophy, Greek theater, Greek everything is there as well. Okay, and so eventually, we're moving down a couple generations. You do get these areas, these societies where, in many cases, local language, local culture, and Greek language are existing side by side. In some of these areas, not only does Greek become the language of academics and the upper class, but it eventually becomes the language of the local government as well. Okay, now, eventually the Persians are kind of pushed back. All right, closer to Persia. They do lose influence, and it does leave a vacuum in the area. Okay, and so many of these areas then come under the control of these new kingdoms, which are a mix of Greek and whatever local stuff is there. Okay? And so, they are in fact Hellenized, or you want to say Greekified, okay, places. I'm not going to go through every single one, okay, but probably the biggest one and the most influential one was the kingdom of Bactria, okay. In this case, the Bactrians started off as kind of a colony, as kind of an extension of the Seleucids, but they do break away from them, and they become their own independent kingdom. A kingdom that has mixed Greek culture, okay, along with little bits of Persian culture, and of course, bits of Indian culture as well, okay? Bactria is basically where northern India / northern Pakistan exists today, okay? So predominantly Greco-Indian, all right, is what we see here, okay? Now, it becomes pretty important, okay, because, okay, it is centrally located in an area where a lot of travelers, a lot of trade actually converges, okay? People that are coming from far eastern Asia, people that are coming from Persia and Greece and Egypt, and then of course people coming from India in the south, okay, they all kind of meet in this area. And so it becomes, the Bactrian kingdom becomes very, very important in this trade. Okay, now, in order to identify, certain people, okay, in Sanskrit, they translate the word Ionia. If you recall, Ionia is the name for Western Anatolia, Western Turkey, where many of the early Greek colonies actually existed. And so they translate it as Yavanna. All right. Now, archaeologists, start digging up in northern India, northern Pakistan, parts of modern day Afghanistan, and they find references, Yavanna, what the heck's Yavanna? All right, Yavanian people and whatever, okay? And it takes them a minute to realize that, oh, this is the Sanskrit translation of the word Ionia. And Ionia referred to the ancient Greeks that lived in Anatolia. Okay, so it's actually referring, to these two cultures that existed side by side. Okay, now the capital of Bactria was Ai-Khanoum, okay, which is kind of located in what today would be like the southernmost tip of Afghanistan. Okay, and so, like I said, this kingdom becomes a Greco-Indian kingdom smack in the middle of Central Asia, okay? And yeah, when archaeologists show up, not only do they find, Sanskrit translations of old Greek stuff, they also find Greek words, and of course, they find, little mini Greek cities and Greek amphitheaters and Greek whatever in the middle of Asia, where technically it had no business being, until they realized that, hey, even though Alexander didn't make it all the way here, his influence did. Okay? Now, besides, I'm sorry. Okay? The blue. Okay? That is Bactria at its height. Okay? And as I mentioned, its location, okay, between the Far East, between India, and of course, everything to the west, okay, the Bactrian kingdom basically survived on trade. Okay, they were the ones that were able to facilitate much of the trade that went between these various areas. Okay, these are pictures. I don't recommend going to Afghanistan, but that out of southern Afghanistan and what today would be northern Pakistan. Okay, of the remains. Okay, we've got columns. I apologize. I thought that one looked better. It did on my computer. And stuff of the various Greek structures that were found, like I said, in an area that early archaeologists were like, how did this get here? Okay, there's no Greeks here. Well, they were Greco-Indians. Okay, now, because they were Greco-Indians, okay, the Indian part brought Buddhism with them, okay? And of course, even though I didn't have it up there, during the time of Megasthenes, he also observed that some people followed, a particular spiritual ideal, but it wasn't until after Ashoka, kind of imposed it on all of India that, we see a major, development. And we see, that the Greeks are finally exposed to these ideas, okay? And so we begin to see then the Greek influence on Buddhism, all right? Now, just as an FYI, it doesn't matter which religion you practice or what belief system you subscribe to, okay? Whatever it is, and however old it might be, it isn't like 100% what it was when it was first created. Okay, time and influences and people and whatever, will often change those ideals. Okay. no offense, Christians, the Christianity that you may have practiced, especially yesterday, probably bears no resemblance to whatever Jesus taught. Okay, there might be some basics, okay, that are the same, but overall, okay, I can guarantee Jesus did not have chocolate and eggs and peeps and all of that stuff, okay, or bunnies or whatever. All right, that comes along later and changes the ideals. Okay, and so in this case, okay, we're going to see how Greek ideas begin to change Buddhism. Okay, now, at some point, okay, a group of people known as the Kushan, which are also an Asian tribe, okay, they take over the area. Okay, the Bactrians kind of fall away, they collapse, and it's the Kushans that kind of come to power. Okay, because the Kushan controlled much of the trade in this area, okay, suddenly we see that, many of, well, let me back up. Number one, the Kushan are converted to Buddhism, okay? And so now, you've converted a rather wealthy tribe to Buddhism, okay? And so one of the things that we see, okay, when it comes to Greek influence, hey, it's really not that bad if you're a rich Buddhist, okay? With this wealth, you can actually do, quite a bit to spread, Buddhism to other people, okay? Now, one of the first things that the Kushan do is they build stupas, okay? And promise I'll come back. That's these, okay? They begin to build these in different areas. Now, what are we going to do with these stupas? Okay, well, let's start putting things from the Buddha in these stupas, and we can ask people for donations to come see. All right? Now, this is just me being cynical, okay? How do you know that it was actually something from the Buddha? Okay, I can build a temple and be like, this was the Buddha's pen. This is what the Buddha used to write his philosophy with. So I'm going to build a temple. I'm going to put the pen right there. Okay, and now you can come in and look at the Buddha pen. Okay, is what he wrote. Okay, and we can have like quotes from the Buddha like on the wall. All right. Oh yeah, this is a pair of the Buddha's boots. All right, and yes, they've got dirt on them because remember the Buddha walked everywhere, type of thing. Okay. Now, just as an FYI, about 20 years ago when I lived in California, they had this exhibit. It was about like all of the popes. It was something that was sponsored by, I assume, the Catholic Church, but it was at one of the museums in San Diego. And so, yes, I paid quite a bit of money to go in. And you could see, like, all the Pope robes and the Pope hats. Like, this is from, Pope Alexander whatever, and this is from Pope Leo the Eighth, and this is the thing from, all of this other stuff. I'm assuming, the Catholic Church isn't going to lie, all right? And so it was from all of these different popes. But some of the coolest things, some of the weirdest things, okay, is they did have a Pope finger, and I forget which Pope it was. Like, after he died, they literally cut off his finger. It's called a relic. And so, yeah, people used to go and, like, pray to the Pope finger. I don't think Catholics do that anymore, but they still had it. It was preserved. It was just a bone. It was just, and they're like, this is the finger from Pope Innocent X. And it was just like, okay, yeah, Pope finger. Cool. But, you pay, you see it. And so, like, okay, now, these ideas come from the Greeks. Okay, like, Buddhists themselves aren't going like, hey, yeah, let's, put a Pope pen, or not a Pope, a Buddha pen, some Buddha keys, and oh, look, here's some things Buddha wrote, all right, we're going to put it in a temple and people can come see it, okay? Not really, okay, but it does become an aspect of Buddhism. Okay, now, as I said, typically any kind of either spiritual, religious, philosophical movement, you begin to have different divisions, you begin to have different areas. I mean, we have, all forms of Christianity, we have, different forms of Judaism, we have different forms of Islam and whatnot. And so we begin to see it's known as Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, so you have OG Buddhism, old school Buddhism that started with Siddhartha and the 4 points and all of this other stuff. But now, okay, in addition to Greek influence, you're also getting little bits of Persian, little bits of Indian, little bits of Mesopotamian, all right, that are mixing together, all right, and changing Buddhism, okay? And so, number one of the biggest differences between original Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism is that in original Buddhism, Buddha was just a teacher, okay? He just, just a transmitter of wisdom, all right? That's it. Mahayana Buddhism begins to declare that no, Buddha was actually a god, okay? And, you need to pray to Buddha, all right? And Buddha's the one that grants miracles and all of this other stuff, okay? So we begin to see this outside influence, all right? Specifically influence from the Greeks, but to a lesser degree, Persians and whatnot, okay? This deification of Buddhism, okay? Now, remember that the ultimate goal of Buddhism is to get you out of this cycle of death, rebirth, death, rebirth, death, rebirth. And, the reason why you're dying and reborning, I almost said respawning, but that's video games, is because you're trying to move up Varnas and Jati and whatnot, okay? Well, if you're not Indian, you don't believe in that, all right? You don't believe that you have to die and reincarnate just to move up to a different social class. So Buddhism really holds no, okay, so I lead a good life and you die and that's it. And they're like, no, you're going to reincarnate. And the person's like, I don't believe in reincarnation. You die, so what's the point? Why would I ever want to do this shit? It's like, I don't believe in that. And so, okay, we need to figure out a new strategy then, so that Buddhism appeals to non-Indians, so that it appeals to other foreigners. And so, there were spiritual landmarks that you need to achieve in your life, to become a better person. Number one, that's one of the changes we're making, so that, Zan here, who is not Indian, he's Greek, Buddhism will appeal to him, okay? Because he doesn't believe in reincarnation, okay? And oh, by the way, there are different ways to get to nirvana, because remember, Buddhists now have money, thanks to the Kushan. They're wealthy, and Zan doesn't want to give up his money, to purge his desires and all this. So we got to find a different path to nirvana, a different path to happiness. And yes, Zan, you will get there right after this life. Okay, you're not, since you don't believe in reincarnation, okay, so we're giving you a different path to nirvana, okay? And so, once again, we see those changes being made for the sake of gaining converts, okay? And once again, other spiritual beliefs, other religions, other whatevers, okay, have done something similar.
What was the motivation to gain new followers?
Because they'd already converted all of India, so let's keep spreading the word. I mean, why did Christianity want to spread? Why does Islam want to spread?
If it was a genuine desire to just share the philosophies with people, they wouldn't want to change them. But those were some.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that the philosophy didn't appeal to non-Indians. and if you want to share it, and if you want them to accept it, and I am genuinely concerned for your soul, Zan, I want you to achieve eternal happiness, then I'm going to give you alternate paths to get there. Okay? You know, German tribes didn't want to become Christian, but hey, you know what? Just change the goddess into like it's Jesus, and the eggs and the rabbits and the chocolate, and you know, how about now? And the Germans say, yeah, okay, you know, let us keep our traditions, and you know, we'll call your Jesus whatever. Okay, so now. Buddhism before outside influences was very simple, okay? But now with the Greeks there, and like I said, to a lesser degree, the Persians and whatnot, number one, we begin to get Buddhist art, okay? Before the outside influences, like nobody really cared, all right? But now we're gonna have paintings and drawings and statues and whatever based on Buddhism. Okay. Number two, yeah, everybody knows the story of Siddhartha and how he wandered around India for 6 years and found inspiration by the banks of the Ganges River. We've heard that story like so many times. We need some new shit, okay, to keep the people entertained, and especially, you know, the Greeks that we're trying to convert. You know, they've had these these myths for hundreds and hundreds of years. They've had these stories for hundreds and hundreds of years. So now we got to come up with stories about the Buddha. Okay, so who knows, like, what the Buddha did? And so, number one, they were able to adapt, you know, some of his life experiences, some very specific points of his life that people knew, but I mean, it's not like he had someone there following him all the time, and it's not as if the Buddha wrote everything down. He didn't. It was his students later on. And so, yeah, you know, many of the stories, you know, are in fact fictional, okay? And before, you know, anyone gets too offended, this is why many religious stories you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. All right, and they are influenced by other societies, okay, which is why in many creation narratives, you know, there's always a story about a flood, okay, somebody plagiarized someone else, okay, and we do see, you know, things like that, okay. Now, we already have the Buddhist pen, the Buddhist keys, and something that supposedly is something that the Buddha wrote in the temple, okay? Why don't we have images of the Buddha in the temple, okay? Temple of Apollo, we got statues of Apollo, okay? Temple of Artemis, we have statues of Artemis, okay? So the temple of Buddha, where the hell's Buddha, okay? So now we have pictures. Does anyone know what the Buddha looked like? All right, so now we got to come up with an image, okay? The Greeks, remember, are the ones that humanized the gods, okay? Ancient Egyptians, ancient Mesopotamians, ancient whatevers, you know, like a dog head and a lion body, or, you know, whatever, okay? It was the Greeks that gave their gods human forms, okay? And so in this case, you know, because Buddhism, before the Greeks came along, okay, you know, would be like, well, you know, the spirit of Buddha is in the tree, the spirit of Buddha is in the air, the spirit of Buddha is in the water. Okay, but I'm not going to put a picture of a tree and call it Buddha, okay? And so, in this case, it is the Greeks that were like, no, you got to make it look like this, or like this type of thing, okay? And so, this is what they came up with. This is the I guess, Greekified Buddha, all right, that you begin to see in images and in statue form, okay? Now, just as an FYI, later Christian artists the thing behind them, okay, is supposed to represent that they are in fact divine, heavenly. And so later on, when Greek influence, affects Christian paintings, you see the halo, the light, the symbol behind every like Jesus picture and stuff like that. Or later on, the saints. Okay, but now, I once asked, okay, because the only Buddha I've ever seen is when I go to like Chinese restaurants or Asian restaurants, and it's typically a fat guy, like with a big smile, all right, type of thing. And I'm like, where does Chubby Buddha come from? Chubby Buddha is the result of Buddhism going to China, all right? That is the Chinese influence on Buddhism. Okay, so if you see this guy, that's the Greekified one, and if you see the chubby one that's smiling, that's the Chinese influence over Buddhism. Okay, and so, okay, I am going to stop right here. All right, now that we're through Buddhism and the